And welcome back to Taxation is Theft, the show that talks about all the ways the government is ripping you off and stealing from you and imprisoning your children and forcing them to go to indoctrination camps. Broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube from an underground bunker deep within the jungles of Mexico, I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Berman, former President of the United States candidate, currently in the race for governor of Texas. And tonight's guest is Arvin Vohra. If you've heard anything about something weird going on with education lately, they're either trying to do Zoom classes where they're spying on your kids and looking around their house and all this other nonsense, or they're trying to take you off to jail for not sending your kids to school for a couple days, you might want to listen to this. We're going to have some pretty interesting conversations. As always, Arvin's a good friend of mine. We've been talking about this stuff for a long time. You can always talk about how much the government sucks. There's so much. But before we get started, I just want to remind you to head on over to taxationistheft.info. That's where we host this podcast, and that's where we have all of the ways that you can support this podcast by buying a t-shirt, a hat, a flag, all kinds of cool stuff. You can buy drugs there. No, I'm kidding. You can't. But if you didn't listen to that whole sentence, you might head over there looking for drugs and buy a t-shirt. Anyways, on to the show. Arvin, welcome. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm excited to be on here, and there's so many amazing things to be talking about in education and politics. I mean, the world's going crazy, so I'm excited to be able to talk about some of this stuff with you again.
It is. It's absolutely nuts. But first, I want to bring up a beef I have with you. You said one time, I started a conversation and I said something about hectares, and you said, oh, don't start with that communist metric system.
Yeah.
I want to know the story. Like, how is that communist?
Okay. I don't like the metric system. I've never liked the metric system because to me it privileges one class of people, scientists, which is like 0% of the population compared to everybody else. To me, if something's a lot, it should be 100, and if it's a little, it should be 0. It shouldn't be like a lot should be some bizarre number and a little. I mean, for example, somebody's telling you that they're going at, and they give you their speed miles, their kilometers per hour. I don't know if that's fast or slow. If they tell you the temperature outside, I don't know if that's hot or cold. So I want hot temperature outside to be 100, and when it's cold, it should be 0. That's how I look at it. Now, obviously, not a very serious point with me, but when it comes down to it, I do prefer the non-metric system to the metric system.
I just think it's so much easier to like add an extra 0 and like instead of trying to convert like quarts and gallons and teaspoons and whatever. I don't know. Man, no, but it's actually really interesting because I had this like really crazy math teacher who was like really interesting. Like I learned like that was actually like one of my favorite classes. But he was really interesting, and he said like the only reason we do math on base 10 is because we have 10 fingers, but it would have been so much better if we were all born with 12 fingers. so we could do base 12. And his rationale behind that was kind of like the imperial units, the evil empire, is that 12 is divisible by more numbers than 10. 10 is just 2 and 5. But 12, you got 2, 3, 4, and 6.
Yeah. So I mean, there's I've heard quite a few people make that argument that if the whole number system was base 12, our lives would be a little bit easier. I mean, actually, interestingly, and this goes, I think, it really connects us to a lot of the taxation related things. One of the reasons that we have so many things in base 60 now, like minutes and seconds and all that kind of stuff, is that way back in the early days of the agricultural revolution, in that area between the Tigris and the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia, the land, I think it's Mesopotamia, the land was so lush that the amount of taxation at the time was just 1/60th of the amount of food that you produced, which obviously I prefer to be zero, but 1/60th is still better than what we pay today. Now, the amazing thing though, Dan, is we're more productive today by many, many orders of magnitude than they ever were in ancient Mesopotamia. But yet now all of a sudden the government needs a larger and larger portion. It's nothing to do with what they need. It's just how much they think they can squeeze out of us until we're the ones left with the 1/60th and they're getting the vast bulk of things.
Right. Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, right? Because if you make enough food to feed your family plus like 5 other people, then they could take the 5 other people's worth. But when you make enough to feed your family and 100,000 other people, they could take 100,000 other people's worth, and you'd still have just enough for yourself, your own family to get by. So that's yeah, as you are more productive, they can take a lot from you, and they could still say, yeah, but look at how good you're doing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens right now. I mean, they manage to take so much. They take income taxes and hidden taxes and all these additional taxes to the point where the actual amount that they take is more than half, certainly, but I think it's also a lot more than half. And they find different ways to bury it in various places. Not only do they take money, though, Dan, they also take human resources. Think of it like this. If you're living in the United States, why, consider this, where are all the amazing builders and the people who are really good with that kind of stuff? They're building battleships and prisons instead of houses and things that people actually want. So we're taking not just money, but skills and misdirecting them towards idiocy. And that's something that I have a big, huge problem with.
That's a really good point. I mean, yeah, I was going to say, like, the whole system. Well, okay, let me answer your question about how much they're actually taking. So, I did some research into these are some government numbers. The total payroll, and of course that doesn't include people getting paid under the table, but the total American payroll is $8.5 trillion. And the total government intake from all levels of government is $7.5 trillion, which works out to 88%. But this is what's interesting, because a lot of libertarians especially talk about, like, oh, you got to cut the spending before you cut the taxes. And once I found out this information, those numbers right there, I actually realized you have to cut the taxes before you cut the spending. Because think about this, and well, let me throw this other number out there too. There's only $3.5 trillion of the monetary base, the actual money, printed money, $3.5 trillion. So what that means is they're taking more than twice of all of the money in circulation out of the economy to go into the government, and then they're spending it back into circulation. If you cut the spending before you cut the taxes, that's going to equate to the government sucking all of the money out of the economy and not putting it back in, and we're left with absolutely nothing. Now, on the other hand, that might be a good thing, because then it'll force people to switch to like other currencies, like Bitcoin or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, here's the thing, Dan. So when we think about, when we think about monetary theory, right, we always say that money is both a store of value and a means of exchange, right? And in our fantasy minds, where we want to pretend like we're all multi-billionaires or whatever, we think of the store of value as being the more important part. But in reality, for the vast majority of us, it's the means of exchange that matters. And if it's all about your current exchange, switching over to a different currency is not really that big a deal, as long as other people are doing it at the same time. If you can change if you can get, if instead of right now, if I put an hour of labor in, I can maybe buy 5% of somebody else's labor because of all the stuff that's removed by the government. But if I could find a way to trade my labor, an hour of my labor, for an hour of somebody else's labor without any government, that would be amazing. Honestly, if I could trade an hour of my labor for half an hour of somebody else's labor, that would be amazing. We're losing so much to that government. And if we really embrace this idea that money is first and foremost, for almost everyone, it is first a means of exchange, and way later is it a store of value, I think that gives us the flexibility of thought that we're going to need to have that sort of a monetary revolution.
Right. Yeah, and that's really interesting too, because a lot of people are always talking about Bitcoin. Oh, it's an amazing investment. Just buy it. Buy as much as you can. It's going to be worth millions of dollars later. And it's like, that's not the purpose of Bitcoin. It's meant to be a currency to exchange and trade. It's not supposed to be like some like get rich quick investment. Which is really interesting. But also, here's another one. The stock market, because people look at the stock market and like now, oh, it's booming. When Walmart or Amazon or any of these other companies make money, that money doesn't go into the stock market. And so like really it's like you can look objectively at the stock market and it's really just gambling, because people are buying and selling these stocks all the time. And you're never actually like, it's never like, oh, I have a share of Amazon. It's not like you can just walk up to the Amazon Corporation, take a brick out of the building and be like, I own this. Like, it's really just, it's really hypothetical at this point. And the only reason that stock becomes worth more is because somebody else goes into that same marketplace and says, hey, you get out, I'll get in. Let's play this little dance. Yeah. And it's almost like a pyramid scheme in that way. And especially when you look at like the futures markets and contracts and all these other like complicated things that they have on top of it, which are like, you know, structured investments and all this other nonsense. It's like, no, that's just gambling. Like, I bet the price is going to go up next week. So, and if it does, I'm going to make this, and you do it with contracts. And it's like, that's exactly what gambling is.
Yeah, I mean, you're right to an extent, right? I mean, when you think about the value of a stock, when we look at the value of, say, future dividends, if the stock doesn't pay any dividends, then we're just looking at the future value of that percent of the company. But you're right, you can't like take it back and do anything with it, aside from the fact that if there's somebody who's a non-majority shareholder that's close enough to becoming a majority shareholder, it gives them certain decision-making power. Right. But you're definitely, I mean, you're 100% right about the secondary market. You know, what options are designed to do is to reduce risk, to function almost like insurance, right? But what they're actually used as most of the time is actually to increase and expand risk, to turn stock investing, which is already kind of gambling, into just pure gambling. And when you see so many, and to go back to what I was saying before, I mean, that's kind of the same as what you see when you have all the great, you know, the carpenters and roofers and all that who are now wasting their skills on making prisons instead of nice houses. The same is happening here. The people who are great thinkers, who could be designing amazing innovations, are instead squandering their energy and intelligence on gambling. I mean, we have almost an internal brain drain of taking the best and brightest, moving them into Wall Street gambling, where they produce nothing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key point. They produce nothing. So it's kind of like all that energy goes into it. All that energy going into like, how do you beat the market? And really all you're doing is moving beans around. You're not producing anything at the end of the day. Yeah, that's interesting. So, what do you think? I know you're gonna have some opinions about homeschooling, and this weird crisis that we're in right now. So, kids are going back to school, but a lot of it's still at home. We're still paying ridiculous taxes, even though the administrators aren't really doing anything but, sitting at home picking their nose all day. I saw a kid get suspended because he had a BB gun in his room at his house, and it was visible on. So now you literally have. I mean, it was a joke when we said, "Oh yeah, Alexa is the CIA and it's in our house and it's spying on us." And now we literally have school teachers with visibility inside of our children's bedrooms, listening and watching everything they're doing. This is insane.
That's like the type of thing that needs to be opt-in, right? So it's one of the things that we think in my company called Vohra Method. We have to think about these things very, very carefully. And so the way that we handle the question of privacy is just through technology. In our classroom of the future, it's not like Zoom. In Zoom, everybody can see everybody, right? So in our classroom of the future, teachers, we can see the students, and students can see teachers, but students can't see each other. So if a student decides they want to have a mental breakdown and strip naked or something like that, not that that's ever happened at Vohra Method, but it's certainly happened in public schools. If somebody wants to do that, it's not going to affect anybody else. And so I think that's one of the ways to start using technology to answer these questions. Now, if you're in a practical sense, see that's what I'm saying. That's why it's important for rules to be intelligent. If somebody's supposed to be doing math and they're instead shooting a rabbit with a BB gun, that to me is a problem as a teacher because they're not going to learn anything. On the other hand, if all they do is have a BB gun, what the hell difference does that make? How does that affect you? And so it's going from something that makes sense, which is, making sure that kids aren't just goofing off instead of learning anything, into something that it doesn't make any sense, which is basically just like spying on the private child raising choices of parents. And so many parents are actually in public schools refusing to turn the cameras on. I think that's right. If I was in public school, I would refuse to turn the camera on too. There's a difference to me between opting into a program that requires your camera to be on versus being forced to attend a thing that also then forces you to have your camera on.
Yeah, and I think, well, isn't that part of this whole thing that they're forcing you to have you're required to have your camera on? Isn't that?
Yeah, I mean, some schools are. There's a lot of privacy issues, and it kind of goes both ways. If everybody's camera's off, then nothing's happening in the class. I can guarantee you that. One of the things that we've been telling some of our students who are worried about this is you can use technological tools and just create video loops. I mean, if using something like OBS, is not that hard to create an indefinite video loop so it'll look like you're in class. And it could be a video loop of you, or it can be a video loop of somebody who just kind of looks like you. But the point is that there are ways to shield your privacy by outsmarting your schools. And I think that if anything that good comes out of that, it's going to be more people taking control of these things, learning some advanced tools, getting ahead of where schools are. Because I mean, schools right now, when we look at what they're doing compared to what those of us in the private sector of education are doing, it's like a 10-year difference. I mean, they're decades behind us now.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. I was just thinking of where I could take this conversation, and there's this guy, Corey DeAngelis, I think.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, I think he's an advocate of the voucher system, right?
I think he's basically against public schools, and I don't actually know his position on vouchers. I know my position on vouchers, which I think it's something that would be great in a mythological world, but to me, vouchers are only going to create an entrenched cronyist class. If you have a bunch of private schools that are now voucher dependent, they will fight free market education harder than anybody, in the same way that taxi companies fought Uber harder than anybody. They have the most to lose. So the idea of a voucher as a transition, it doesn't make any sense. If you want to make an actual transition, it would be just to start charging either partial or full or sliding scale tuition to use public schools. That's the only thing that's going to get people out of government schools and into free market education or homeschooling.
Right. And that's one of the reasons I brought that up, because we had this conversation before, and I used to think, yeah, vouchers sound great. You're getting something back from government, but it's the dependency. And this is I had this conversation with a bunch of libertarians that seem to support UBI, and their whole thing is like, oh yeah, but it's like it balances out, and it takes away like all the poverty incentives and all these other things. And I'm like, yeah, but ultimately it creates further dependency on the system, and that's the problem, because as you create more dependencies, it's harder to pull anything out and disconnect people from it. That's like,
but let's look at that phrase though, because people are like, well, what does it mean to create dependency? It just means to make people two things: one, lazy, and two, what's actually more common, insufficiently innovative. Listen, most businesses fail. You know that, I know that. Most businesses fail. And they fail for a variety of reasons, but one is just not keeping up. It's hard to run a business that doesn't fail because you're in such a competitive environment. You have to constantly innovate, constantly come up with new ideas. You need to find ways to give your customers more of what they want. You need to make sure that you're sticking to your own, to your own principles. It's hard. And if you have another option that says, yeah, you don't have to do all that, Yeah, a lot of people are going to end up taking that, and then they're going to be out of practice in what we need. Today, despite the jokes to the contrary, I don't actually think that American auto workers are lazy. I think they have become not innovative, and I think American car companies, by and large, have become non-innovative, which is why they have lost so much of their market share to foreign competitors. And once you lose that, that doesn't come back easily. And that's exactly, you're right. I mean, that's what happened with things like like UBI. It makes people not unfit to work, but like unable to innovate in a competitive environment at the required speed and level.
Right, unable to get along without it.
Mm-hmm.
And to your analogy, that's interesting too, because it's like I hear a lot of people use the analogy when you're starting a business, you don't really have to know where you're going, just get on the road and start driving, and you'll steer wherever you need to go. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because your analogy of not keeping up is kind of like you get on the highway and set it on cruise control and like expect to get somewhere amazing, and it's like no, you're just going to keep going in a straight line, and the road
Mm-hmm.
might eventually end. Um,
Yep.
that's like, yeah, you have to actively navigate. I mean, it's like playing a game of whatever, basketball, or like, you've got to actually get in there and do something. There's no automatic like, okay, I set the business up, it's just going to go forever. But that's interesting because there are a lot of business models that are like that, and they almost like Coca-Cola, for example, right? There's like the fear that like, oh, well, we haven't changed the product in 100 years, but we tried it once, we tried to change it, and then everyone got mad at us, so we had to change it back. I think there's definitely like that fear. Once a business gets to a certain size, there's that fear from the stockholders.
Sure.
No, you better not do anything crazy. We already know it works. Don't go too far from there. And I think
Sure.
that
But I mean,
helps
if
to
you
like,
look, but
yeah,
if you look at the company as a whole, right? Look at the Coca-Cola company. They have probably over at this point 100 different soft drinks that they offer, right? It's not less, and they're
right,
not a company that just makes one product. They make many, many products. They're constantly innovating. They came out with machines where, at the push of a button, it can like remix the ingredients to create a variety. I mean, one of several dozen different drinks from a single machine and a single spigot. So it's not that they stop innovating. They innovate in their processing. They innovate in their advertising.
right.
They're relentless, and I think that's the key thing that people need to understand, that business success requires that kind of relentlessness. It's not something where you can just kind of hang out and expect to get anywhere, or just be sort of willing to work and that's going to be enough. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you need to be constant and never ending in your intensity, your dedication, your perseverance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I see that a lot. A lot of people are just like, "Oh yeah, I'm the CEO. I started my own business and I hang out at Starbucks all day." And it's like yeah, but like you have to like it's not enough to like I don't know. It's almost like they're creating the lifestyle ahead of being productive, and it's like you've got to figure that out. You have to be that productive. But I think that whole thing's been glorified. So that oh yeah, be your own boss, and so people are like, okay, I'm my own boss, now what? And it's like, yeah, but that's only like part of the equation. um but yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you can innovate in other ways other than just the product, and that's the marketing and everything else. And I think that's really interesting too. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, we're all still going to eat food, right? We're all still going to breathe air. It's not like these things. It's not like those products are ever going to change. But yeah, how we consume them might. That's really interesting. And especially like with, I mean, I don't know if things are ever going to go back to normal, but like the way things have changed, it's really interesting because this whole 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing has been going on for months now, and I am not sure at what point, especially like with our kids going through like this whole thing of being scared to be too close to people and wearing masks and washing your hands all the time, like are we ever going to get back to a point where it's normal to like go out in public without a mask on? Because
Yeah.
there's not just this one virus, right? There's the flu season. Like, are they going to start saying like, oh well, I mean, we don't have to wear masks, but you might as well because it'll keep you from getting the flu now too. Um,
I mean, I think we're just, we're living in a very different time, and things change over time. When my grandparents were kids, it was not normal to lock your door, right?
mhm.
But today, in most cities in the world, you lock your door. I mean, it would be abnormal not to. It would be strange not to. The coronavirus is interesting because it it shows. I'm pretty sure it's shown pretty much every terrorist cell in the world, every terrorist organization in the world, how to get a viral bioweapon. I mean, the thing is if you want to make a weapon of mass destruction, let's say you want to use like make a nuclear weapon, you need plutonium, you need tritium, you need these very difficult to get resources, right? But if your goal is to make a viral weapon like coronavirus, I mean, basically just need some sick animals and some probably not willing test subjects, and just see what you can get to transfer from the animal to the human. I mean, it's a lot simpler, and it's really lowered the cost for creating a weapon of very mass destruction. I mean, we've already had as many people died in the United States, about as many people in the United States have died due to coronavirus than died during the entire Vietnam War, and that's in just a year. So I do think that you're going to see people adapting. You're going to see that, like, well, what are the things that we need to do in a modern era with modern threats? And for some people, I think that's going to be just living in different places. I think that city life is going to be less appealing. I think for some people, it's going to be precautions. I think for other people, they'll be like, you know what? I'd rather just have fun and take the risk. And then for them, the life changes will be zero.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting that you talk about city life, because there's a guy that I was talking to who, as soon as this thing hit, he went and sold his house because he thought the market was going to crash. But it turns out the markets in big cities were crashing, but everywhere else it was going up because everyone was trying to get out of the cities.
Yep.
So yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, I kind of went through that transition. I know there's an attractiveness of the big cities, especially for young people, because that's where all the action is, that's where all the parties are, that's where all the big jobs are, that sort of thing. But especially now that a lot of those jobs are becoming remote.
Exactly.
I think it's really interesting that we're transitioning.
I mean, you and I are perfect examples of this. Your work has been remote for a few years now, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and
Most
and
of my
so
life,
and
yeah.
that lets you do everything from Mexico, and that's going to be more and more appealing to a lot of people. My work has been, it was 90% remote until March, and then it became 100% remote. And that change does give you the flexibility, and you can say, well, listen, where am I going to get, where will my dollar have greater purchasing power, or where do I like the culture more, where do I like the laws more, where do I like things more? And that's actually a really great thing. It's not just great, it's great for individuals, but it's also great because it now forces governments to compete, right?
Right.
Like, if your country has high sales taxes and high property tax and high taxes that they then use on idiocy, people will say, well, listen, instead of living in your country, I'm just going to go to this other country right over here. I'm going to go to the country next door, like you literally did. You're like, listen, I'm going to go to the next door country because you guys are being annoying. And
Yeah.
and I think that has become more and more feasible. Where it's not just like you get a job and then you talk your boss and letting you work remotely. It's like the job is just remote the whole time, from the beginning to the end is remote.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense for, I mean, businesses of all sizes. It's you're not wasting a ton of money on office space,
Yep.
and all this other stuff. So it's definitely
I mean, there's so many things. I mean, there's so many things you don't have to worry about, right? So when things are online, you don't have to worry about, I mean, you don't need general liability insurance anymore, right? Because
right.
somebody trips, they're not tripping in your house, so why do you care, right? You're not tripping
Right.
in your office, so it's not your problem, right? You don't need all, so it's a lot of insurance is immediately eliminated, right? You don't have to worry about, like things like workplace harassment and all that kind of stuff anymore. You don't have to worry about assault. You don't have to worry about a lot of the things that have become big problems for a lot of in-person companies, or, were big problems until everyone stopped going to in-person companies. So there's just a lot of stuff that it takes off. It lowers your cost. And the biggest thing is it lets you work from somewhere else. I mean, you can, like we say, you can make dollars and spend pesos. You can be somewhere different. You can move around. You can have that kind of freedom. And I think today even more than ever before, we have conveniences that make going out less different from staying in. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not that hard today for a normal person to just get food from any restaurant delivered to their house, right? It's not that hard for a normal person to watch, Netflix or Amazon Prime, watch movies at home. There's not that much that you actually need to go somewhere else to do, aside from the sense of just being social and around people.
Right. Yeah, and it's I mean, you think of how much I've been commuting for the past couple weeks because we bought a house and I'm kind of overseeing some construction. um,
Mm-hmm.
but so I've been commuting for the past week, which is something I haven't done in like decades. And it's like, and I've done this, and like you start to realize like, holy shit, this is taking up for me it's an hour every day, half hour each way. um,
Mm-hmm.
for some people it's more, it's 2 hours round trip every day, and it's like this all adds up. Whereas like before I started doing this, I would wake up, I'd start working. That's like an extra half hour that you have to make coffee, watch TV, have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation with your wife, do like any of this stuff. And actually cooking, like that's I mean that's one thing that we usually my wife and I were done working, and it's like, okay, well, let's go into the kitchen and make something, and it's not, oh, we got to make this trek all the way home, and it's tiring too, because I've noticed like immediately after the drive, even though it's like it's a half an hour of sitting in the car doing nothing, it's mentally exhausting. And so now when I get home, I'm a lot more tired than I was, if I had just been sitting at my house for a half an hour doing absolutely nothing, um,
Mm-hmm.
and then moving on. So I think there's so many. I think there's so many benefits to that. And some of those are probably going to be stress-related health benefits and everything else
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, yeah,
Like for
we need
most of
that stuff.
human, yeah. I was gonna say, Dan, for most of human history, people lived in villages. And if you look at, for example, like Downton Abbey, I know that's idealized and prettified, but that was normal life. I mean, it's not that everybody had to live in a city until, and even in Downton Abbey, that's, kind of post-industrial revolution, all that kind of stuff. Not until the Industrial Revolution, people feel like they needed to flock to cities. So for most of human history, people lived pretty spread out. It was a normal thing to do. And I think it's just psychologically good. I mean, when people who live in New York don't say, wow, this is a really rejuvenating and relaxing place to be. You know what I mean? And I think
Right.
that as more people see that you can live away from the city, that you can still get a lot of the conveniences that were in the past only at the city. In the past, if you wanted to see a cool show, you had to see the opera. And then more recently, you would go to a movie theater. But today, honestly, even before the thing, if somebody was like, hey, do you want to go see a movie at the theater? I'd be like, oh, God, why? When I could just do it right here.
Right.
And
Right.
I think you're going to see the differences. Like right now, people are coming face to face with the fact that the differences between what you do in cities and just what you do in a normal house are just not that big anymore.
Right. Well, and this is interesting that, um, like one of those things, I think, bringing it full circle back to taxes, is like that was the like okay, so property tax I think is like one of the foundations of like this like system of it's a complicated system of slavery, forced labor, making us run on hamster wheels, spending
Yeah.
energy doing absolutely nothing, and that comes from property tax because ultimately, like let's say we lived in a big, spread out like village or farms and whatever,
Sure.
like very spread out. You don't need much, right? You can live off the land,
Hmm.
water, food, shelter. That's pretty much it. That's all. That's all you really need.
Yeah.
Some people, oh, there's electricity and all this other stuff. Okay, well, so you move to the city so that, like, okay, you get to, but in order to do that, you need jobs and because you got to pay someone for the electricity. So, but those are kind of luxuries at some point, right? You still have
Hmm.
that option to live out in the country and like just live off the land until property tax comes along and says, "Well, you can't do that. You need to pay us just to exist on this land." Well, where are you
Yeah.
going to get that money if like, well, there aren't any jobs out here. I was just, the guy next door doesn't need me to help him kill his chickens. He can kill them and eat just fine. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to go into town, into the factory, to get a job for somebody else, just so you can take the money back to your farm so you can pay the tax man. And I think that's like, that creates like this, it's that forced servitude. And of course, like, a lot of libertarians will say, oh, but no, that's a voluntary contract. You went into town, you made that decision. And it's like, yes, but the involuntary side of that equation is the tax that's placed on the person that forces them to, like, I mean, if they went into town looking for a job because they wanted to make a little bit of money so they could spend it on some luxuries, they would have more negotiating power for what their salary is going to be. But when they absolutely have to get it in order to pay the tax man, it's like, I'll take anything. 10 cents an hour, okay, fine, I'll take it. I got to pay this guy to get him off my back.
Yeah. And that's true. And you're totally right about that. When people talk about how do we raise the minimum wage, well, you can do it in all these different ways, but when you just do it in the way that the government wants to, which is just make it a fixed wage, ignoring the fact that it costs different amounts to live in different places. It costs more to live in Manhattan than in rural West Virginia. When they do it that way, what it does is it forces people towards big cities, because that's where, if you're in New York, offering people $15 an hour to work kind of makes sense with the local economy. If you're in rural West Virginia, $15 an hour to give, I mean, it would have to be, that's like how much you would need to pay like a doctor out there. I mean, that's not a normal amount to pay because the cost of living there is much, much lower. So the way to make wages fairer, to make them better, is to remove that external pressure from the wages, like you're saying, which means, in this case, it means to get rid of all property taxes, make it so that people can live indefinitely on their own if they want to, and then make it so that companies have to give that incentive. Say like, listen, we need you to come work. We'll give you a bunch extra. Will you please come work? As opposed to, you have no choice, take what we give you.
Right. Absolutely. It's basic supply and demand. Why aren't the employees demanding more money? Well, they can't. They're afraid of losing their job. We'll take that fear away and they can demand a lot more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you artificially boost the supply, it's going to lower the cost. I mean, we're lowering the cost of labor and everyone's suffering for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Myra's a big fan of yours. She's commenting, I was told school choice will defund public school. And she said, so?
I mean, that's the point, right? I mean, public schools are the worst type of education in the world. They teach math extremely poorly through Common Core. Common Core is one of those many public school things that hurts kids to make textbook companies rich. Pearson's gets rich, but your kids get dumb, right? Now, here's the thing, and this is the important idea of decentralization, right? In order to get schools to use Common Core, Pearson has to bribe a relatively small number of school boards, right? On the other hand, let's say that each individual family was choosing textbooks. They would then have to bribe each individual parent. I mean, to bribe a parent to ruin their own kid's education, you have to pay them a lot. To bribe a school board to ruin a bunch of kids' education that they'd never met, you don't have to pay them that much, but that would be unaffordable. Decentralized decision-making is also going to be better decision-making because it can't be bribed as easily, and usually it can't be bribed at all.
Right. Yeah, and I hear people complaining all the time, oh, you know what they're teaching my kid in their school? So take your kids out of their school.
Yeah, leave.
Come up with your own curriculum. I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like a no-brainer. I don't know why anyone would. It's like, just make your own choices. There's absolutely no reason to have anyone make decisions for you unless you're afraid that you're going to make terrible decisions. But it's like, do you really trust politicians to make better decisions?
Yeah. You know what it is? It's fear. That's all it is, right? So I'll tell you this. And for a very long time, I was afraid of putting together a computer, right? I was like, I don't know how to do any of that stuff. I'll just like buy it. So the result was I was just buying a bunch of inferior and overpriced computers. See what I'm saying? Then about last year, I said, listen, I'm just going to learn how to do this. It wasn't anywhere near as hard as I thought it was going to be. And the result is also a much better computer, a much cheaper computer, in every way a more advanced computer than what I could have afforded. And it's not full of just junky components, right? And obviously I don't have to install, bloatware and that kind of idiocy. When it comes to education, like, yeah, there's a learning curve. Of course, it's education. It's hard. It's complicated. But that learning curve is going to take you much less time. The learning curve will take you less time than one argument with one teacher. It'll definitely take you way less time than trying to petition a school board or something like that. So yeah, there's an upfront cost where you actually have to learn how to do some stuff, but that cost is so much lower than what you would have to go through if you tried to go through the system. One of the things we did then is we put together something called the AP Homeschool Project. That's aphomeschool.com. And it's guidance for high school level homeschooling to make sure that people just know what to do. So if you have high school kids or middle school kids, you don't even have to do that first part of figuring stuff out. We did it for you. It's free. It's on the website. Go check it out.
Nice. So you're offering actually like free tools for people.
Yeah. I mean, the AP Homeschool Project is we took the people who are the best at this stuff, right? People who really know how to master the subjects first, and then also prove that you've mastered the subject to somebody else using either AP exams or SAT subject tests or whatever else you want. And we just said, like, here's your roadmap. Do this. You'll never have to waste another minute in a nonsense school class ever again. It's totally free. Here are the steps, right? And, some folks have been starting to get into it, and we're seeing more people get excited about it. And my hope is that as this goes forward, we're going to have more and more people switching over to the AP Homeschool Project, getting a better education, a lower cost education, and one that develops curiosity and intellectual abilities and all those type of things that school is supposed to do anyway, but fails to.
So is this like, I'm checking this out right now. Is this like supplemental to a public school?
No, it's like a full replacement.
So this is like, this has the entire, sorry, what did you say it was?
Oh, aphomeschool.com.
Homeschool.com. So this is like,
so it's literally a step-by-step guide of if you want to leave public school and you want to do homeschooling, but you don't want to be left behind, right? Because that's people's fear. They're like, well, what if I do it less good than the schools? And I say realistically, that's probably not going to happen. You'd have to really try hard. But what we've done is this. We've said, suppose that you want to be ahead of the best schools in the country. You want to be ahead of Exeter. You want to be ahead of Stuyvesant. You want to be ahead of TJ. You want to be ahead of La Rosey in Switzerland. You want to be ahead of the most elite schools, some of which cost over $100,000 a year. This is how to get ahead of those schools, let alone a regular local public school.
And so this is like I see you're linking to some of the other so you're kind of creating a curriculum out of other curriculums, it looks like.
Exactly. And that's the guidance that people often need. People say, listen, I know I need to learn, say, American history. There are 2,000 books on Amazon. And what most people do is they just freak out, and either they don't make any decision at all, or more commonly, they just pick what their local school is using. And I'm like, well, that's the whole point of homeschooling. You're not stuck with their stupid decisions anymore. That's the worst book. That's the book that somebody had to bribe your school board to use. That's what that book is. And so you see, I mean, it's interesting when you get involved in the homeschooling community. There's a lot of textbooks that are very popular where the entire budget, the entire yearly revenue of that company is far less than what Pearson spends on lobbying. So as an example, Saxon Math, very popular. And it's named after the founder, John Saxon. I can't remember his first name. His last name is Saxon, obviously. And they're popular books. Kids engage with them. They're rigorous. They're thorough. I've checked them for mathematical rigor. They're good in that sense. But the whole company is smaller than Pearson's lobbying budget. They can still compete though, right? They're not competing in public schools. Public schools never use Saxon books. They use Pearson's books. But among homeschoolers, even though they don't have a big lobbying budget or a huge advertising budget, because they're good and because people share information in the information age, more people learn about them. So what we've done with the AP Homeschool Project is we've said, listen, here, I know there's a million books out there. Use these ones. And these aren't books that we own or anything like that. I don't have like, stock in the company or something like that. They're just the books that we think are the best.
Right, and I see. I mean, you've got comments on here like when your speed is fast and your error rate is 0, move on to the next phase, and it's like that's like that's like a perfect example of like the like move at your own pace. I mean, like when you're with an entire class and it's like, okay, you didn't get last week's, well, too bad, we're moving on to the next week. Then it's like, okay, you're going to be totally lost and now you're behind and you're not going to understand anything for the rest of the semester or class.
Yeah, the rest of the semester wouldn't be too bad, but in my experiences has shown that it's not usually the rest of the semester. It's usually like the rest of your academic career.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point because you need the same thing to move to the next year. But at the same time, if you're ahead and you got it, you get bored, you stop paying attention, and then you're going to miss something. So even though you were doing good and you were ahead, you can totally fall behind too. So, I mean, yeah, that's a really important step is that everybody kind of moves at their own pace so that they don't miss anything like that because either they're bored and they're not paying attention or because they need a little extra time with a couple components. But what's really
the
interesting
human
too,
mind. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, so like when I was a kid, I always like was really intrigued by electronics, but I could never like really get it. And so today I'm trying to build this like power supply thing. So I'm trying to relearn some of this stuff, and like I can't figure out how the hell a transistor works. So I'm on YouTube, and there's like a million videos of like kids, like they're basically like they're going to class for this stuff, and they're making YouTube videos showing what they learned in like really small lessons to like try and re-explain it, and so that because when you explain something, you reteach yourself and you get it, and it's like there is so much content out there for like anything. It's amazing, and it's like you like people used to like say, oh, school is where you go because that's where all the information is, and it's like, no, the information is everywhere now.
Yeah. And there may have been a time in human history, I mean, I doubt it, but there may have been a time in history where there were some institutions that had a little bit more information than you could get elsewhere. But that time isn't now. There's no, except for information that is, military classified, all information is plentiful. You just need to know what to do. And so that's what we've done with aphomeschool.com is we've basically said, the amount of information is infinite. We already know that. Here's what you need to do to get the basics of academic rigor and all that. And the other thing that we showed, and this is a really important thing, is we showed what you can do that would be either illegal in a public school or disallowed in a private school that's regulated by the state. So one of the things we show is how you can take many more AP exams if you want to use that as your way of proving your ability, how you can take many more AP exams than even a private school would allow you to take. So you're paying 0 tuition to get ahead of the people who are paying 50 grand a year in tuition.
Wait, you're not allowed to take more tests?
So in private schools, what they'll do is they'll restrict the number of AP classes that you can take. And because most people don't know that you can just take additional tests without taking the classes, that creates a limitation on how many tests you end up being able to take. So one of the things that we've done is said, listen, they're being capped. Your competition is being capped. So go ahead of their cap. If they're capped at 4 AP exams and you do 5, you're already ahead. And what's really interesting that gives you a lot of options, either to just put that directly in your resume, say, I took this many AP exams, whatever, it shows that I'm academically diligent and self-motivated. Or if you want to go to college, which I never recommend, but if you want to go to college, you can use that as a selling point to show that you do stand out from your academic competition.
That's interesting. Yeah, but I mean, like I'm just so mad that this is like it's so obvious, but it's like if you don't know it's there, if you don't know that this is even an option, it's where do people get okay, like you're sitting at home and you're like, okay, I think I'm gonna have a baby. And then you have a baby, and then you're like, okay, at what point, like, does the government come knocking on your door and say, hey, we heard you have a baby, you need to go to this place and enroll him in this school? I know that's not how it happens, but
Hmm.
like what is that? And I wonder if there's like because I think it's mostly social. I mean, a lot of people, especially when they start having kids, they start like, oh, I'm gonna move to this neighborhood, they here they have great schools and that sort of thing. And you can start looking at schools and like, what's the resource that people use when they're like, oh, I have a kid, I know I need to register him for school at some point? Where do they usually go to start looking? And is there a way that that we can create something that like gets in front of that to divert them and say like, hey, stop looking at these public schools, they're trash?
So, so it's not. I don't think there's anything where somebody comes knocking at your door and says you have to send your kids to public schools. I think parents just do that because they think that's what you're supposed to do. They think that's the best choice, so they do it, right?
But do they know
And
like
and it.
which one? Like, I mean, like, because they don't
Oh
just like
yeah, they
wake
look
up
at
one day
the
and
ratings and stuff.
like,
And they
where's
like
the ratings?
move to neighborhoods that have better public schools and all that kind of stuff. I mean, better being a relative term. I'm not sure there's a
Right.
good public school in the whole world, but less bad is what they're looking for. And so they'll make those decisions. I think if you want to get ahead of that, I think the place to do that is the maternity ward. I mean, you need to get way ahead of that. And even better than that is to start talking to people constantly now. Talk to people of any age. Talk to people who haven't even thought about having kids. Because even if it's 10 years before they have a single kid, they might need 10 years to learn about this stuff or to come to terms with
Hmm.
it or to understand or to even be able to admit to themselves that the education that they supposedly got at a public school was garbage. And so there, that's a lot of, that's a lot of difficult psychological work to go through. And so I think it's something where we need to talk to everybody about this all the time to get that message through. Right now, we're nowhere close. Right now, people believe that sending your kids, if you're rich, that sending your kids to public schools is like the right thing to do, and sending them to private schools is kind of like the wrong or selfish thing to do. That's where we are culturally right now. And we need to work to change that a lot to get us to where we need to be, where the future generations are going to be getting amazing education instead of garbage government propaganda pretending to be education.
That's that's nuts.
Mm-hmm.
um wow. Yeah, no, but you're right. And I think there are and it's interesting because like whenever there's like a big idea, and I talk about this with uh, you know libertarians or you know whatever, when there's a new idea that's, I mean, it's disruptive, right? It's going to, I mean, you talk about like something that's going to disrupt an economy or an industry. This is something that's going to disrupt government and its monopoly, um, and it's something, I don't know what it is about that, but it's like, the media doesn't always like to pick up on this stuff, and I don't think it's just because they're best friends with the government. Even though there is some of that going on, but you've got what am I trying to say here? Something that's just like such a big shift in what we consider normal, in
Mm-hmm.
changing that. Um, you have to reach hundreds of millions of people, and you can, like, yeah, like, you know with COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew about that overnight because it was on every news channel.
Sure.
But ultimately, that's still advertising and marketing. It's just
Yeah.
that there are certain channels that are available to certain people that give them billions of dollars worth of free advertising overnight. Um, but when it's something like this, those channels are not really available, and a lot of them are shut off to it because of, I think, well, I don't know. I don't want to jump to conspiracy conclusions about that, but those are shut down, and so there is a lot of that one-on-one conversations. I mean, if Oprah got on TV and said like, "Oh yeah, everybody should switch to homeschooling," I guarantee you, overnight, like millions of people will be doing it. Um,
Yeah, but let's look at the whole picture, right? Because there is a big picture to be seen here. The companies that our military contractors are also the companies that own TV networks. You know what I mean? And so it's not like a conspiracy. It's just one company. It's a conspiracy of one person. And it's not so surprising that a company that is so dependent on government, that's so dependent on big government, is going to oppose something that could be, it's not so many steps down the road to between homeschooling and opting out of government worship, right? So
Right.
there's that. But I think actually what you said before is I think even closer to a really fundamental truth, which is something that threatens one part of the status quo threatens in some way every part of the status quo. And we've seen this with big breakthroughs, for example, in science, are often followed by major tumultuous changes in the world of fine arts, even though they don't have anything inherently to do with each other. And so right now, the media you're talking about, those are the media that are at the very top of this current system. This system has made those groups at the top, right? The next system might also do that, but it also might not do that. Why risk it? So if you're at the top, you don't want big changes happening in the society that could make a new society where you wouldn't be at the top.
Right. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about that fear of changing. And it's almost like if you're able to, with the use of force or threats of force, control a marketplace so that you stay number one without having to innovate, then why not? That's the easiest way,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah. So there's definitely a lot of that going on.
And people say, well, public schools wouldn't want to do that because they're publicly owned. They don't have the profit motive, and maybe they don't. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I think that's nonsense, but let's just for a moment give them the benefit of the doubt. Public schools aren't just the classroom; they're also the textbooks. To say that the textbook manufacturers don't have a profit motive is just a bizarre position to take. They're also the curricula. To say the curricula producers don't have a profit motive is insane. To say that the calculator makers don't have a profit motive, that doesn't make any sense. To say the people that put particular computers in the classroom so that people get used to those operating systems, to say they are not interested in profit is bizarre. Of course they are. So it's not just, it's wrong to think of it as just like, the teachers in the building. It's all the organization that surround public schools that anyone, I believe, in the world will agree is driven by that profit motive. And of course, Pearson's that has become a multi-billion-dollar company by pressuring lobbyists, by pressuring school boards into buying substandard textbooks at hugely inflated price. Of course, they don't want things to change. Pearson's is not popular among homeschoolers, not because people are like afraid of Pearson's. Most people don't look at the publisher of any book. It's because their books are just bad. Their textbooks are simply bad, and nobody buys them because they're not good. And to expect them to give up a system that makes people buy bad textbooks, that's never going to happen. They're going to fight that with every fiber of their being.
Right, and that's the same. That's the same thing. I mean, they're basically choosing between we innovate and make our books better, or we manipulate the marketplace so that it doesn't, so that we can sell our terrible books and still keep a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting how that works. Well, anyways, we're at the end of the show, but I want to give you an opportunity, of course, to plug everything. I know you got a couple websites up. We already brought some of aphomeschool.com, vohramethod.com. What else you got?
I mean, those are the big ones right now. I mean, that's where we're focusing a lot of our attention and changing education and make it something better, something more accessible, something more useful. Listen, right now, guys, I know that a lot of you guys have had huge changes in fortunes. Some of you guys were doing amazingly well and now are totally struggling. And so we made the AP Homeschool Project specifically for you. We made that for you so that even if right now you're just financially terrified, even if you have not a single dollar to your name right now, we've made a program for you to make sure that you can provide the best education in the world for your kids. So that's one direction. Now, some of you guys either have your fortunes unchanged or some of you guys made a whole pile of money. And you're saying, listen, I want the best education on earth. I don't care what it costs. So we have vohramethod.com. Go to vohramethod.com if you're just saying, listen, I just want the best. I'm not worried about the price. If you are heavily worried about the price, go to aphomeschool.com. And between the two or some combination of the two, I guarantee you're going to figure out something that's going to radically improve your educational experience this year and make this the best academic year of your entire life.
Awesome. And yeah, and just taking a look at this, like I saw you got Khan Academy on here, and I know they were one of the early innovators in some of this. And Kuman, if that's how you say it. Yeah, there's so many resources, and I think you've got some of the really great ones on here. So definitely, if you're interested in any of this stuff, go check it out if you got kids. Yeah, thanks for joining tonight. This was really awesome.
My pleasure. It's always great to talk to you, Dan.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to the show. If you're listening on the podcast, please make sure to subscribe. We're available where all of your favorite podcasts are, Apple and Google and everywhere else. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, please remember to like and share and comment and tag your friends and do all that fun stuff. Get everybody interested in this because this one especially, this is the future of our nation is at stake here. If we have stupid kids, they're going to keep voting for stupid politicians, and that's no good for anybody. This country's going to hell in a handbasket. Awesome. Arvin, thanks again for joining. This has been really awesome, and I will see you guys next time. Taxation is theft.